There is a grain in the bread your great-grandmother made. A grain that fed the workers who built the pyramids. A grain so powerful that when Rome conquered Egypt, they did not just take the gold. They took the seeds for 10,000 years. This was the grain of empires. The grain that built civilization itself. More protein than the wheat in your pantry. More fiber than the bread you ate this morning. More minerals than anything modern agriculture has offered you in a century. And today, you have never heard its name, not because it failed, because it succeeded too well, because you cannot patent what grows wild, because you cannot control what farmers save and replant, because an empire decided that feeding people mattered less than feeding profit. They replaced it with something faster, cheaper, and emptier. They called it progress. They called the original primitive. They are still lying. The grain is Emmer, and the archive opens in 1924. The year is 1924. And British archaeologist Gertrude Caton Thompson is excavating at Emmer in Upper Egypt. She expected pottery. She expected tools. She expected the usual fragments of daily life from 3,000 years ago. What she found instead stopped everyone. Preserved wheat chaff, sealed in the dry Egyptian earth, waiting in darkness for someone to understand. In 2019, scientists at University College London extracted DNA from those same grains, 3,000 years old, still carrying the genetic signatures of domestication that happened 8,000 years before that. But this was not the first discovery. Emmer wheat has been found throughout Egypt's archaeological record, at the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, built during the 3rd dynasty. Archaeologists discovered vast quantities of Emmer stored in subterranean chambers. Grain buried with kings, grain meant to sustain pharaohs in eternity. This was not animal feed. This was not the food of the poor. This was the grain they trusted with the afterlife itself. The Egyptians called it Bidet. For 3,000 years, Bidet built their civilization. Every pyramid, every temple, every scroll of papyrus paid for with wages of Emmer bread and Emmer beer. The workers who dragged million-ton stones across the desert received their payment in Bidet. 4 loaves of bread and 2 jars of beer daily. Enough nutrition to perform physical labor that modern humans can barely comprehend. But Egypt was not alone. The Sumerians cultivated Emmer as early as 3000 BCE. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets record Emmer as a primary grain of temple offerings. The grain of the gods themselves. The Romans called it far. From this word, we get farina. We get flour itself. The very language of bread begins with Emmer. When Roman legions marched across Europe, they carried Emmer in their packs. When Roman senators debated the fate of nations, they broke Emmer bread at their tables. The Roman soldiers' daily ration, the Cibaria, was built around far. Historians estimate a legionary consumed nearly 3 pounds of Emmer grain daily. This was the fuel that conquered the known world. For 10,000 years, from the first farmers of the Fertile Crescent to the last days of the Roman Republic, Emmer was not just food, it was foundation. So what did they know? Let me tell you what is actually inside. Emmer wheat contains significantly more protein than modern bread wheat. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals document Emmer protein content at 7% compared to 3% in modern durum wheat. That difference compounds with every meal, but the difference goes deeper than quantity. Emmer protein includes a broader amino acid profile, with higher concentrations of albumins and globulins, the functional proteins your body actually uses. Research shows these proteins constitute 30 to 39% of total protein in Emmer, compared to only 15 to 25% in modern wheat. The ancients did not know the word amino acid. They knew that Emmer bread kept soldiers marching and workers lifting stone. They knew that their children grew strong on it. They knew what worked. The fiber content tells the same story. Emmer delivers more total dietary fiber than modern wheat varieties. A 2015 study in the Journal of Diabetes Research confirmed Emmer's fiber content exceeds both durum wheat and common bread wheat, the kind of fiber that feeds gut bacteria, regulates blood sugar, and keeps you full for hours instead of minutes. The mineral profile is where modern wheat simply cannot compete. Emmer is an excellent source of magnesium, providing 29% of daily value in just half a cup. It delivers meaningful amounts of zinc, iron, and selenium. These are the minerals that modern industrial farming has stripped from our soil and our grain. But here is what the research actually shows. Emmer has a lower glycemic index than modern wheat, measured between 45 and 55. The same carbohydrates, absorbed slower. Blood sugar rises gradually instead of spiking. A 2001 study on diabetic patients found that incorporating Emmer wheat flour into their diet resulted in 11% reductions in total lipids, triglycerides, and LDL cholesterol over just 6 weeks. A 2017 review in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry confirmed that ancient wheat varieties show improved anti-inflammatory properties and better metabolic profiles compared to modern wheat. The researchers documented reduced blood glucose, improved insulin sensitivity, and lower cholesterol in multiple clinical trials. The Egyptians who lived on Emmer bread did not have a word for metabolic syndrome. They did not need one. So here is the question nobody wants to answer. If Emmer wheat is more nutritious, more sustainable, and more beneficial to human health, why did it disappear? The answer begins with Rome. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, they inherited the most productive agricultural system in the ancient world. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and Emmer was the grain. But Emmer has a flaw, not a nutritional flaw, an economic flaw. The grain is hulled, each kernel wrapped in a tough outer coating that must be removed before milling. This takes time. This takes labor. This takes patience that an empire demanding faster, cheaper, more could not afford. Rome began promoting free threshing wheats, bread wheat, durum wheat, grains that released easily from their hulls, grains that could feed an empire faster, even if they fed it less. Within 3 centuries, Emmer went from the grain of civilization to a regional specialty. But the true erasure came later. The 20th century finished what Rome started. You cannot patent an ancient grain that farmers have saved and replanted for 10,000 years. You cannot sell expensive hybrid seeds when the old seeds grow just as well. You cannot profit from a crop that needs no pesticides because it has evolved 10 millennia of natural resistance. You cannot build a fertilizer empire when Emmer thrives in poor soil where modern wheat would fail. You cannot sell irrigation equipment to farmers growing a grain that survives drought. You cannot control a food supply built on crops that anyone can grow. You cannot monetize what belongs to everyone. The companies that now control global agriculture, Bayer, Cargill, ADM, Syngenta, they did not ban Emmer through legislation. They banned it through economics. They made modern wheat so cheap, so subsidized, so artificially profitable that growing anything else became financial suicide. American wheat farmers receive over $5 billion in annual subsidies. Emmer farmers receive nothing, $70 billion. That is the annual value of the global wheat market. 70 billion reasons to keep you eating the grain they control. They classified Emmer as primitive, low yield, obsolete. They did not mention that Emmer yields are lower because Emmer does not require the nitrogen fertilizers that poison our water. They did not mention that Emmer is drought-resistant in ways modern wheat will never be. They did not mention that Emmer resists diseases that devastate modern wheat monocultures. They did not mention that in a warming world, the grain they erased might be the grain that survives. They did not suppress it through conspiracy. They suppressed it through neglect. They simply stopped teaching farmers how to grow it. They stopped including it in agricultural programs. They stopped funding research. They removed it from seed catalogs. And within 2 generations, the grain that fed humanity for 10,000 years became a footnote. But here is what they could not erase. The Emmer itself, the knowledge itself, but knowledge does not die. It waits. In Ethiopia, farmers never stopped growing Emmer. They call it aja. In the highlands, where modern wheat struggles against altitude and thin soil, aja thrives. Not famine food, premium grain, sold at higher prices in local markets because people remember what it means to eat real bread. Ethiopian grandmothers still make injera from aja for special occasions. The knowledge passed from hand to hand for 100 generations. In Italy, Emmer survived as farro. Tuscan grandmothers kept the recipes. Tuscan farmers kept the seeds. In the hills of Garfagnana, a protected region in northern Tuscany, farro never disappeared. Today, farro from Garfagnana holds IGP status, the same protection given to Champagne and Parmigiano Reggiano. It sells for 3 times the price of common wheat in Italian markets. Italians never forgot what Rome tried to bury. In India, Emmer persists as kapli. In the southern states of Karnataka and Maharashtra, kapli wheat is recommended by traditional healers for diabetics. Ayurvedic medicine never stopped recognizing its value. 10,000 years of wisdom, surviving in the margins. In Turkey, near the very fields where Emmer was first domesticated in the Karakadag Mountains, farmers still grow it. They call it gurnik. The grain has come home. Half the world never forgot. The other half was taught to worship the replacement, but that teaching is starting to crack. That moment is now. So here is what you do. Finding Emmer is easier than they want you to believe. Search for farro medio, the Italian name for true Emmer, in specialty grocery stores and online retailers, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and most natural food stores now carry it. Online, companies like Bob's Red Mill and Jovial Foods sell Emmer flour and whole berries. Look for whole Emmer berries, not pearled, to get the full nutritional benefit. Pearled farro has been processed to remove some of the bran, taking the fiber and nutrients with it. When you find it, you will recognize it. The grains are longer than modern wheat, with a golden brown hue and a faint nutty smell that modern wheat lost generations ago. Cooking Emmer is simple. Soak the berries overnight to reduce cooking time. Simmer for 45 minutes to an hour until tender but still chewy. Use it where you would use rice, barley, or any whole grain. In soups, in salads, in grain bowls. Emmer flour makes bread with a deeper flavor and denser crumb. It makes pasta that holds sauce the way pasta should. Start by replacing a quarter of modern flour in your recipes with Emmer flour. Increase from there as you learn how it handles. One important note about safety: Emmer contains gluten. If you have celiac disease or diagnosed gluten sensitivity, Emmer is not safe for you. This is not negotiable. The gluten structure differs from modern wheat, but it is still gluten. However, if you have simply felt better avoiding modern wheat without a formal diagnosis, Emmer may be worth trying under guidance from a healthcare provider. Some people who react to modern wheat tolerate ancient varieties better. The protein structure is different, 10,000 years different. Reclaim the name that Rome tried to bury. Say Emmer. Grow it if you have land. Save the seeds if you grow it. Demand it from stores that do not carry it. Ask for it by name. Every person who asks for Emmer is one more voice proving that the erasure failed. Every bag purchased is proof that 10,000 years of wisdom cannot be deleted by 2 centuries of corporate agriculture. The grain they conquered The nutrition they replaced, the knowledge they taught you was primitive. The Egyptians knew, the Romans definitely knew. Now you know, Emmer is still here, still growing in Ethiopian highlands, still feeding Italian families, still healing in Indian villages, still waiting for anyone willing to remember. There is a grain in the bread your ancestors made, a grain that built pyramids, a grain that fed empires, a grain they told you to forget. It never forgot you. It can feed you. If this opened something for you, subscribe. Every share helps preserve knowledge they spent 2,000 years trying to erase. The next vault opens soon.